we interrupt your regularly scheduled brainwashing in order to bring you breaking news. A special segment of the almost daily Zcast, focused on curious, quirky, and quixotic news items that you may have missed during the last 48-hour news cycle. Hosted by me, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo.
Greetings and salutations, fellow purveyors and, why did I pick purveyors? That's not the word I was looking for. Fellow consumers and spiritual seekers. I guess we're all consumers, right? We gotta buy stuff to keep the world moving. Anyways, that's besides the point. On today's episode of Breaking News, a bit of juicy news-breaking hypocrisy that is just tickling my person pink. I mean, I'm flabbergasted. Okay, but let's not put the cart before the horse. I do believe this happened yesterday. I may be wrong. Timelines get a little blurry. It might have happened this morning. But I think it happened yesterday. Yesterday being Wednesday, right? Today's Thursday. Thursday, May 13th. We were this close to a Friday the 13th. Thank God we didn't get one, right? Okay. Yesterday, Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy publicly stated, and mind you, this statement that I'm about to read from him, he put out immediately following a meeting with Joe Biden, which at some point happened after the GOP chose to oust Liz Cheney from her leadership role for daring to question the legitimacy of Donald Trump's claim of a stolen election. In the aftermath of those two things, just hours after attempting to silence Liz Cheney for daring to deny Trump's bullshit, Kevin McCarthy goes on to say publicly, live on TV, in front of several different media outlets, so this cannot be denied and dismissed as fake news. I'm sure this aired on Fox and Newsmax. Quote, and I'm quoting him, I watched it happen live. Quote, "No one is questioning the legitimacy of the election. We are here meeting with President Biden, aren't we?" Close quote. I think I may have added the "aren't we?" But he definitely had that vibe of like, see, proof I don't question the election. I just met with the legitimate president of the United States. That's amazing and fascinating and quite the profound and I was a little surprised. I have to say I didn't expect him to flip so dramatically after flopping and flipping and flopping so exhaustively on the very same issue in prior days and weeks. I was a little caught off guard. In part because I was still reeling from and enjoying the juiciness of his sort of fellow in hypocrisy, his partner in hypocrisy's own massive hypocritical actions of late, which is McConnell. And I have this note somewhere. This is a different note. I have to find my words or else I'll forget what I meant to say. McConnell has once again, mind you, this is not the first time he's done it, he has openly declared himself, quote, the Grim Reaper, close quote, which seems to mean he is the destroyer of all DNC proposed legislation. He will openly announce that his only priority, his only agenda item is absolute obstructionism. Which is funny because he was just a heartbeat ago accusing the Democrats of that in a sort of indignant, how dare they? That is the most un-American thing they could ever choose to do kind of way, right? And he did that exclusively for 8 years during the Obama administration, never once acknowledging how absurd his position was, how damaging to the nation it was, and never once taking time to, maybe rein in some of the egregious and extreme hateful rhetoric being spewed by his base at Barack Obama, explicitly for being the first black person in the White House as the president. Which, of course, he then turned around and bitched and moaned and, like a little crybaby, whimpered that poor old Donald Trump is getting the most hateful reaction from his opposition ever in American history. This egregious flip-floppery from leadership at the center of the GOP, and mind you, just because I'm busy calling them out right now, doesn't mean I don't have valid critiques against the left. I'm not a blind faith leftist. In fact, the most frustrating thing about me to most Americans is that the leftists judge me because I won't buy into their overly aspirational ideological constructs that never seem to work out the way they're promised. And the right judges me for not giving my blind faith to their radical, right-wing, elitist, totalitarian, pseudo-Christian, but mostly sort of white supremacist ideology that they all cling to. Now, I'm not saying that everybody on the right is a white supremacist. I'm saying that the grand old party seems to be heavily attached to white supremacist ideology vis-a-vis the apparent need to retain that voting bloc because they don't feel they've got enough votes otherwise. But I digress. So, Mitch McConnell is doing his whole I'm an obstructionist, shame on you for obstructing routine, which is tedious and obnoxiously obvious and, quite frankly, really rather pathetic. For a 60-some-odd-year-old man, he's acting like a kid in kindercare who refuses to acknowledge that his behavior is both disruptive, uncooperative, toxic, and hypocritical. Those are more than two things, so both was not the right construction of the sentence there. But he's just gonna pout and wave his creepy zombie purple hands around whenever the Democrats stand up against Republican. Now, I'm not saying that the Republicans shouldn't have the right to stand up and speak to the things they disagree with. They absolutely should. In a well-balanced representative democracy, which I would argue perhaps this isn't so much, this system that we currently tolerate isn't quite there, not yet anyways. But in the ideal situation, in a well-balanced, fair, truly democratic system, all parties, left, right, center, Buddhist, transcendental, whatever you like, all parties should have a seat at the table, and all parties should have the free speech right to share their thoughts and engage in the public discourse of building consensus. Now, the thing is, in America, and I think arguably other places in the world, but since I live here, I'm going to restrict my criticisms to this place. In America, public discourse, healthy debate, and building consensus have all been trashed and abandoned. And what most people, regardless of party or ideological backstory, most people fight to win. Now, I'm not saying all people, right? I'm the first guy to remind everyone, like, absolutist brushes block out everything and don't let you see any of the real detail that is there, right? Absolutism is putting blinders on. And the universe is a relativistic place. We are relativistic creatures. Why are we painting ourselves? It is our ignorance, like our willful choosing to deny relativism and constantly fight for absolutist statements which cannot be because of their absolutist nature, that we create these hypocrisies. No one is questioning the legitimacy of the election. I mean, Trump still is. The hardcore Q base continues to hold their breath for the great coming of the storm. And even the sort of middle of the road GOP enthusiasts who kind of wish Trump would fade into the background and let some other person step up to the microphone and be a hypocrite. They, some of them are still sort of lackadaisically waiting to see if maybe the insurrectionists had a point or not. And Kevin McCarthy himself was questioning the legitimacy of the election just hot moments ago. And it wouldn't surprise me if he turns around and in a quadruple two-face maneuver proceeds to continue questioning the legitimacy of the election moments from now. I'm not shocked at this kind of hypocrisy. I've been pointing it out to people since Ronald Reagan was in office. And yes, I started early. I was yet but a child when the political shenanigans of the United States of America seemed pretty obviously manipulative, riddled with hypocrisy, and sort of, what's that word I'm looking for? Not bespoke. That's like for like when you order a specialty thing and they make it just for you. Just completely riddled with these problematic issues of echo chambery neurolinguistic manipulation, pitting everyone against everyone else, instead of attempting to solve the problems that are created by this wonky, hypocritical system. Now, the reason it stuck out to me is because that was a really bold statement to make, right? And while, I guess I wasn't surprised that he's flip-flopped on the flip-flop, and I won't be surprised if he flip-flops further, I am curious as to what the bloody hell the point was. And in a different direction, I'm curious if the GOP base has just come to accept hypocrisy, two-facedness, and straight-up bullshittery like this as acceptable standard practice. Is this what they mean by owning the libs? Because bullshitting on your own shoes and then calling it something else, that doesn't own anybody. You just look like a moron, Kevin McCarthy. I'm not calling him a moron. I'm just saying doing these kinds of things exposes him to people judging him in that way. For my part, my concern is deeper than just the surface flip-floppery. my concern runs deeper than just the fact that politicians on all sides of the political spectrum have a tendency to make fools of themselves vis-a-vis standing up for one thing and then decrying it at some other point, while pretending that their views have remained consistent. My concern is that it's gotten so extreme, right? And it's not new. It began long before Donald Trump arrived on the political scene. But it seems to me, from my perspective, looking back in hindsight, there seems to be a very clear pattern. As soon as Trump brought his entire brand, which is, by definition, all encrusted with con artistry, hypocrisy, bullshittery, flip-flopping, bold-faced lying, and all kinds of other problematic behaviors. As soon as he brought that baggage, that branding, that entire collection of tools and forced them onto the political scene and forced their normalization by refusing to acknowledge any of the questioning, refusing to admit when he's been called out on hypocrisy, right? It's emboldened those in the GOP that were already sort of sliding down that slippery slope of becoming two-faced political puppets for the party. Now that Trump has successfully convinced the voters that the grand old party cannot thrive unless he's involved, which doesn't make any fucking bit of sense whatsoever, because it was doing a marvelous job of slowly fucking itself in its own corruption before he got there, right? And don't stress, people are like, why are you still bashing on about Trump? And I'm like, because he's ramping up for the midterms. That's why. And in the meantime, I've got plenty of insightful criticism. There's a word I was looking for and I said the wrong one. I've got plenty of biting criticism for the left and for the center. Because, as I've been telling people since Ronald Reagan was in office, in my humble opinion, all political ideology is a form of mental manipulation, psychological servitude, and all political ideology has been hijacked by the system of oppression, which is spending a lot of time and effort convincing people that it hasn't, right? Like, look at what Donald Trump promised people. Donald Trump gained the appreciation, the admiration, the blind faith, love, and support of a broad swath, not the total totalitarian everything of the GOP, but a very large chunk of the GOP base, because he fed them their own grievances. He spoon-fed them their own grievances back to them and said that he alone can fix it. Did he fix anything? Not really. Did he make a lot of announcements and claim to have been fixing a bunch of things? Yes. But like the carrier situation with that company where he supposedly saved a bunch of jobs, but that company went off and got rid of a bunch of jobs anyways and moved their shit to Mexico. And now, right, GM is doing pretty much the same maneuver. He didn't fix a damn thing. We are no better off as a country than we were before Trump came into office. And of course, everyone's super wicked, intensely eager to blame Biden now, which is a little ridiculous. I mean, the first 2.5 years, you got to really be careful and trace the causality, right? Like, is this something that the current administration triggered, or is this something that is the gradual or the natural conclusion of something that was initiated by the prior administration. That's always a really critical bit of discernment that must be done, which few people bother doing. If it's bad, it must be the bad guy's fault. If it's good, it must be the good guy's fault, regardless of who's actually in office. That's just the way people do things, because that's what has been, that's what politics has been reduced to. My guy's the good guy, your guy's the bad guy. I'm just going to blame your guy for all the bad things and take credit for all the good things because my guy is clearly the good guy. And that's why, dear friends, this has been, this is nothing new. There's been a slow creep of this kind of corrosive ideological manipulation for decades, if not arguably centuries. And it's why, the left get annoyed with me because I refuse to just buy in blindly to the promises made by the left, and the right gets annoyed with me because I refuse to buy in blindly to the ideological constructs of the right. Because all ideological constructs are gilded mental cages, in my humble opinion. But I digress. That's today's bit of weird, bizarre breaking news. And I think I've rambled on quite a bit. Let's all watch this space. Because, if Kevin McCarthy really meant it and no one's questioning the legitimacy of the election anymore, then the GOP should distance itself from Trump and maybe abandon this Stop the Steal fundraising blitzkrieg. That was the first thought that came to me. It was he was saying it, I'm like, oh wow. They must be done with all of that fundraising and feel confident that they can identify some new hullabaloo to pin on all their fundraising efforts. So the whole thing is just going to disappear and get swept under the rug. Who knows? I don't pretend to know where things are going, but I do stop at every major weirdness and crazy thing that's said and go, what, where, huh? How do these pieces fit? And what kind of patterns seem to be emerging? Here's the problematic pattern I see emerging. Donald Trump has lost some percentage of his base because his claims are becoming exceptionally harder to swallow. His bullshit is getting harder to buy into, right? Especially the QAnon stuff. But mind you, I'm convinced that that's a separate department. That Trump is not actually even cognizant on a day-to-day basis of what's going on in Q world. That he sometimes likes to retweet that shit because it makes him feel good. And the Q believers are all about this really perverse glorification of Donald Trump because a certain percentage of them believe he's the second coming of Christ, which is fascinating to me, especially since today is Ascension Day. Isn't it weird? I wonder how many self-proclaimed pseudo-Christians that love and admire and worship Donald Trump and think that he's somehow the second coming of Christ realize that today is Ascension Day, have ever recognized, celebrated, or studied Ascension Day, which is one of the holiest days in the Christian calendar, mind you. It's more important than Christmas. But put a pin in that because we'll be making a special episode to discuss that a little later today. So be sure to tune in to the Almost Daily Zencast main title sequence for today, where that will be the subject. But also, coming back to the news, there's a lot of crazy things in the news, and I pick and choose, obviously. I'm not unaware of the fact that I pick and choose my things to highlight on breaking news. It's just the stuff that I find the most ridiculous. But in other news, the world's a dumpster fire. Israel is trying to butcher the Palestinians. Syria is, Syria. And that whole fucking clusterfuck of pain and suffering and endless war is going on. What's that other country? There's a trifecta. And I mean no disrespect. I just wasn't sure I was going to talk about this. All I'm acknowledging is, the real news is always that humanity is enduring profoundly horrific suffering imposed on itself by itself as humanity clings to toxic ideological constructs, corrupt political beliefs, insane religious beliefs, radically incorrect spiritual beliefs, etc., etc., etc. These things are all ego traps that seduce us into hating and judging other human beings as inferior, which then allows us to support, endorse, and participate in organized murder for profit. If that isn't the loudest, most alarming, most serious bit of news that is perpetually breaking, I don't know what is. But put a pin in all those things, folks, because I promised you shorter episodes, tighter flows, and more accessible content. So I'm going to wrap things up for this little segment and humbly invite you to stay tuned as I will return for at least one more segment today. And if I'm lucky and I don't blow my vocal cords out, a third. Thanks for tuning in as always. And if you have some local news that you would like to hear featured on this segment of the Almost Daily podcast series, please, oh please, feel welcome to come on down to Spreaker.com/show/Zencast. Sign up, become a follower, drop your comments on whatever given episode you're listening to, or if you're not feeling that vibe, come on down to Facebook and search for the Almost Daily Zencast Facebook page, where you can add your comments, submit your questions there. As always, friends, thank you for tuning in. May peace, love, and grooviness be blossoming in your heart. Until next time, I have been your humble host, the incorrigible Mr. Zappo.
And that is the latest breaking news. We now return you to your regularly scheduled brainwashing. Thank you for listening.